Hey, everybody. Welcome to a special edition of our Tuesday virtual happy hour. I'm Greg Avola, founder of Untapped. We're really excited to chat with you tonight. Thank you so much for joining us on Tuesday. It's not Thursday. Remember that. We have a special guest today, Carla Lauter. I'm going to bring her on the screen. Carla, thank you so much for being part of our virtual happy hour. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you? Well, great, considering.
Yeah, I know exactly. A lot of stuff to talk about, especially in the world today. But most importantly, out there, if you're listening, we're going to drink some beer now because that's exactly what we do for a virtual happy hour. So, Carla, what are you drinking tonight on your side?
So I have a Four River Timber Hitch, which is a red ale, and it's not a hoppy red ale. It's just a nice classic, like English style red ale, and it's awesome. Four Rivers out of South Portland in Maine, and I love it. Like, look at the color on that. Like,
That's a great color.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I've been a huge fan of lagers and pilsners. So I'm trying. This is the Carton Canyon, the American Adjunct Lager here. I'm excited to try this one here out of Carton Brewing Company at Highlands, New Jersey. So excited to do that. So if you're out there right now, let's crack open your beers and we'll check them in. Just a reminder as we crack open these beers here, to check in your beer at Untapped at Home, which is a venue that you can use as your safe haven, for lack of a better word, as we looking to kind of beat the pandemic here when it comes to checking in your beers. So for all you people out there, look at this color. Very different than your color, but I'll take it. So, thanks very much for watching and enjoy your beverage. I got to tell you, having a lager nowadays, a craft lager, is just so refreshing. After all the IPAs, Hazy IPAs, it's Imperial Stouts, I'm looking forward to getting more into lagers as things go down here. How's your beer drinking on your side?
It's great. This is, again, like you were just saying, it's a little bit refreshing compared to, the Hazy IPAs, the IPA, everything. I do love the hops, and I do love the lagers too, but it's really nice to just have something with a malty backbone every once in a while. It's so smooth.
Yes, absolutely. Well, in case you have been living under a rock, you don't know who Carla is. Carla, give us your backstory and what you're doing in the beer industry now before we get into questions from the audience.
Sure. So the short story is that I've been writing about beer or talking about beer in one form or the other since 2007. I started a blog called The Beer Babe, and I've been freelancing. I've been a columnist for Portland Press Herald. I'm on temporary hiatus from that for now, but I'm just writing about beer and talking about it a lot on Twitter. If you follow me on Twitter, I tweet a lot. But generally speaking, been following what's going on in New England. And specifically Maine Beer since 2007, and kind of really trying to get people to understand our beer scene and maybe how it's different or how it's the same from the rest of the country. And I think we have a pretty awesome beer scene here. So if you are prepared for tweets about how awesome our beer is, then you can follow me.
Awesome. Well, you get a great segue there. I think that one of the things we've discussed a lot on these shows is about Maine Beer and Northeastern or New England IPAs that started up in Vermont and carried its way through. You talked a little bit about how Maine Beer is different. Kind of you explore a little bit about that for people that are watching, maybe never been to Maine before or had a beer from Maine. Why is it different in your eyes?
Well, we have a couple of things going on kind of in parallel. We have the oldest brewery in New England, which is Geary Brewing Company, which was established in 1983, still going. It's changed hands, but it's still pumping out really good English ales, things like that. But then we also have like the newest of the new hype breweries that have like these really good hazy IPAs, like the Bissell Brothers of the world. And then we have this really other awesome rural component of our state where we don't necessarily have like these urban tasting rooms. We have a farmhouse that's in a town that only has 3,000 people in it, but they're putting out amazing beer. Like we have one that opened a couple of years ago called Sassanoa Brewing Company, and they just put all these wonderful herbs into the saisons. And then we have things like Allagash, which are these Belgian style, behemoths. I know that Brian Roth was talking about Allagash when he was on as well. And it's just this lovely landscape that is really taking advantage of both the history of Maine and the locality of Maine and the regional and the seasonal that's going on here. And I think that it's just a little bit different than kind of some others just because of the way that we came up. We were also the first state to ratify prohibition. So we've got some laws we had to overcome and like some, misconceptions about alcohol to overcome. So it's just evolved into a really interesting dynamic scene, but it's a big part of our economy. And it contributes a lot of jobs, a lot of resources. It helps our agriculture. We have hop growers and malt processors and all kinds of things all happening right within our state. So there's a lot going on, and it's absolutely worth a visit if you haven't been up here.
Absolutely. I can agree. As a New Englander, I grew up in the Massachusetts area, and Maine is very close from that perspective. Also, great beer, like Carla mentioned before. If you have a question for Carla throughout this entire segment here, you can use the chat on your platform, whether you're watching it on YouTube or Facebook or Twitter, and we'll be able to filter that question and throw it up onto the board here. Put her on the hot seat, guys. Seriously, let's get some really good questions for it. I would appreciate that. But, we talked about the beer scene obviously being in Maine, specifically when it comes to the things we just talked about of the locality, the seasonality. What are the hotbeds from the areas in Maine in terms of the cities that you see as a big beer town? I think one of the ones that I always know as an outsider is Portland, but there's a lot of history with Allagash and Portland. What are the other areas that are kind of popping up in Maine for hotbeds for breweries to kind of put their foot in?
Well, we definitely also have another big scene going on in Bangor. So we have Orono Brewing Company that's killing it up there. And a lot of small regionals kind of just within that whole area are contributing to this like completely independent beer scene that isn't necessarily, we're not getting the beers down here in the Portland bars, and we're not getting the Portland beers up there, but they're, they have their own kind of like characteristics to them. They've got great brew pubs up there. They've got that's a hot spot for a lot of new action that's going on. And also, I'd say instead of it all being located in one spot, we also have this thing which is almost the opposite of that, which is little towns having their own little brewery. So you go to Norway, Maine, which is tiny, and it has one brewery, Norway Brewing Company. And there's something about being that community's little gathering space, that community's little, maybe a brew pub or a restaurant or just a tasting room or a beer garden where people just hang out. They talk about business. They make, deals for small businesses to open. They kind of do these little teeny partnerships. So it's almost like there are tiny little dots like all over our state, which I think is actually kind of cooler than having them all centralized around just where everybody lives. There's a huge amount of pride about like, this is my town's brewery. Like, this is so wonderful. You got to visit my town. And I think that helps. And just from where I live a little bit more in central Maine, and we're having a lot more breweries pop up in that area, which was originally really a gap. There was not a lot going on there about 2 years ago, and we've got a lot more opening up now. And I'm kind of excited about it because it's like, oh, closer to me.
Yeah. I think when it comes down to Maine Brew, I think people know kind of the big one, Maine Beer Company, Allagash, and Portland, and how there is Portland's a hotbed. But there's a lot of people asking in the chat about what brewery outside of Portland area, which you kind of talked a little bit about as your recommendation. But might as well put it on the screen, Ryan. We'll put Ryan's question up here. And he says, "What brewery outside of Portland area would you recommend as your favorite from that perspective?"
Oh wow. Okay, outside of Portland, my favorite. Let's see. All right. So first of all, I'm not going to do favorites because I love all of them.
I added the word favorites. Ryan didn't say that, so it's all good.
I think an easy answer to that too is Maine Beer Companies in Freeport, which is not in Portland Central. It's up the coast a little bit. They're all obviously doing awesome stuff. If you're in New York, you've had those type of things, but there are smaller ones like I mentioned earlier. Sassanoa is doing some really awesome like saison, like brew it kind of stuff going on with herbs and whatnot. Oxbow's fantastic. They're main breweries in Newcastle, which is really in this beautiful mid-coast area. It's like in the country. They have a farm. They have a separate tasting room that's also in Portland, and then they have another one that's more up in the country. But their original is just fantastic. There's a lot. There's a lot of great.
Well, this actually,
obviously, Norway Brewing Company is also fantastic. They have a beer called Mr. Grumpy Pants that that is a coffee stout, and it's awesome.
That's awesome. Well, let's do another question from Keith in the audience here. He's putting you on the spot. The top 3 breweries folks that visit the most, but probably have never heard about in Maine.
Oh, okay. That folks should visit but probably haven't heard about. Okay, so one I always mention here is Sebago Brewing Company. So they have a new headquarters where they've put all their stuff together. They used to be like a series of brew pubs and then a production brewery that wasn't really something you visited, but now they have like one nice visitable location. Their beer is awesome. It's one of those beers that you like put in your fridge all summer, and it's just great. But they kind of get overlooked because they were in that middle period where they opened in the 90s. Like it wasn't in the 2010s when everything was hot, and it wasn't in the 1980s when everything was like the OG people. But they're great, and they're outside of Portland in Gorham, but they're definitely worth visiting. I will also add, just for if you're coming to Maine to visit something cool, go to Monhegan Brewing, which is on Monhegan Island. You have to take a boat to get there.
Whoa, that's
It's
awesome.
fantastic. You walk around a little trail, and they've got a beer garden that's like lined with lobster traps. That's how you experience the beer there. And it's a combination of experiencing that beer and just the location, and the people are fantastic. Also related to that is Lake St. George Brewing. The daughter, so there's a brewer who owns Lake St. George, and his daughter runs Monhegan. But Lake St. George Brewing is up in Liberty, Maine, which is also, again, not really near anything. But they're making some fantastic beer, including a really good goza and some just some excellent different styles that not a lot of people are doing. So
yeah,
I'm again with the top three, but those are three great ones that you should go see.
And honestly, Carla, we never filtered these questions to you beforehand. So the fact that you're able to rattle them off that quickly, and if I give you a thumbs up or extra point in this system, I would do that. We don't have that.
I talk about Maine beer a lot, so it doesn't take much to bring many to mind. You have to stop me after three, though.
Here's a great question from Ninja 71985. It asks, I'm currently drinking a rainbow sherbet from Prairie Arts and Ales. I was curious of your top three. Again, we got this little system here. Sour and goza beers would be. Let's pick them in Maine to keep it in the Maine theme here. Right. What would your pick there be on this front?
A lot of the Cool Ship series from Allagash are like just so unique and different. They have one of those open fermentation vessels. They basically blend different beers from that. They let them sit for years. They have many different ones. Some are aged on fruit, some are not, and some are blended. In particular, there's a lot in there that I really like. There's one that they age on pumpkins, which is called Ghoul Ship. It doesn't taste anything like pumpkins, but they released it in kind of around Halloween time, and that one's fantastic. Trying to think of the other sours. Oxbow's done a lot of tart fruit beers, and I'm gonna blank on some of their names right now, but like they have a whole fruited series that are just excellent. And usually around now, unfortunately, they're not doing it this year, but they actually have an event where they have the sour beers that they make that are fruited, and they have pie of those same fruits to pair with it. So you can go and have beer and pie, and that's, to me, like heaven. So that's fine.
Beer and pie are great.
Yeah. And then for the goza, I really like Rising Tide has one called Pisces. And it's just a straight goza. It's not trying to be like overly tart, but they make it with Maine seawater, and it's just so refreshing and great for the summer. It's pretty low in alcohol, as most gozas are, and it's just got this gorgeous like can art of a koi fish on it, and it's awesome. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, great question, Ninja. Thank you so much for asking it. One of the things that I personally love about a lot of the Maine beer company up there is Hazy IPAs. I've said it. I know people are going to flame me in the comments for this, but it really is an amazing spot for these, specifically Bissell Brothers and some of the things that they've been able to do up there with the substance and whatnot. And the first time I had the Bissell Brothers beer was in New York City, and someone had brought it down and shared it with me in a bar. I was blown away. It was my first introduction to some of the beers. What's it like being in that kind of environment where you kind of are known for the hazies, but there are so many other types of beers out there that are kind of under the radar when it comes to the beer in Maine? What's the kind of the story behind that?
It's kind of funny because I traveled in my previous job. I traveled a lot across the U.S. just for work and for things. Right. And whenever I would say, okay, I'm into beer and I'm from Maine, I would get the following two questions. Is that the first was, oh, can you get Maine Beer Company lunch? Which is actually a West Coast IPA, but it was like incredibly popular for a period of time, especially anywhere near New York City. People were like, "Oh my god, lunch!" And I was like, "I can't get that any easier than you can." So, it's much more easy to get now, but at the time, it was one of those stand around the corner, line around the corner beers. And then when Bissell came on the scene, between that and like the heady topper kind of haze craze that happened there,
right.
There were kind of two things, is that people would either come up to me specifically and be like, oh, you guys have that hazy beer. What do you think of that weird hazy beer? Like there was this bizarre, like, kind of shift like on day one where people were like, no, I want nothing to do with that. Or I want only that. So when people come to visit Maine, they're like, oh, you should recommend me beers, breweries I should go to while I'm here. And I'm like, you got to narrow it down for me. What are you looking for? Yeah. Because I can send you to 5 haze breweries, or I can send you to 5 sour and Belgian breweries, or I could send you to 5, they're more traditional, making reds and stuff. So it's really, you have to narrow it down a bit, because we have now a really nice saturation of everything. And I just want to give a shout out, these guys that do this beer, which is called CMYK, that's Good Fire Brewing, and I think they're killing the haze game. Like, if you come here, it's a smaller brewery, they've only been open a couple of years, but they're kind of in the same neighborhood as a lot of the other breweries there. Them and Lone Pine are doing really, really nice New England style IPAs. They're being very creative with them. This is called CMYK, and you get one in a 4-pack. You get one of each color, because graphic design geeks. But the taste of them is also very good, and they're doing some really, really nice stuff. I think we kind of weeded out the ones that were doing the haze that were like, kind of just doing it to do it. And I've really got the ones down pat that are doing it right.
Awesome. Yeah. If you join us today, we're talking to Carla Lauter, who's a freelance beer writer focusing on Maine beers. And ultimately, we've talked about this issue with almost every single person on this show, but COVID-19 is obviously here. And, what are some of the things that are happening in the Maine area with respect to breweries? We talked a little bit about this in the pre-show, about some new things that are popping up that make beer more available to people. What are some of the things you're seeing from breweries up there and how they're dealing with this situation?
So we've had a really hard time up here with what's been closed and what's been not available. And there's been some difficulties in that bars and breweries were being kind of considered the same thing for a long time when they were deciding what to close and what not to close. So it's been a little bit difficult to, kind of navigate. But our governor, thankfully, has been very receptive to feedback, and our Brewers Guild has been really helping people do that. But they've gotten really creative, just, in the meantime, gotten really creative with means of contactless pickup, delivery. In some cases, there's a third-party delivery company that sprung up so that breweries can fulfill orders to them, and then they'll go and deliver them to people within a certain radius, and that's been expanding. So it's kind of, you can get your beer not just 5 feet from where you live, but maybe in the next town over. And then we've seen, just a lot of creativity. People have been doing collaborations with people. People, even with all of this and being shut down, are still doing fundraisers and community drives and participating. I did a really long Twitter thread a couple weeks ago, and it's pinned somewhere. But it's basically, I went through every brewery in Maine, and I was like, here's how they're dealing with this. And they were all dealing with it in a very, very positive and healthy way, except for one, and I won't talk about that tonight. But they've all been trying really hard. But the problem with Maine really is that they're so dependent on summer and people from away to put them back in the black every year. And without those people, no matter how much they're doing with carry out and takeout and all of that, it will never be enough, because we literally double our population in the summer. And it's such a brief period of time. And also, even in the spring, when this was first happening, is whenever all that production would be ramping up. So they essentially all stopped, and they took what they had, they threw it into cans instead of kegs. And now that they're reopening, they don't even have kegs to be able to pour on tap at the restaurants that want it. So it's very, very challenging. And I'm really, really hoping that everybody makes it through. There's been a lot of There's been a lot of challenges here, and I would hate to see people go under for just, being in the wrong debt structure at the wrong time. There were a few that had just put down money to expand. There were some that had just opened a second location. There were some that were just about to open. It's not something you can predict. So I really, we've been trying as hard as we can to just, drink all we can and support local. But honestly, without those outside people, it's still, I could drink twice as much as I normally do, and it's still not enough. So it's, I'm wishing them all the best, but it's been very challenging.
Yeah, obviously, everyone's affected by COVID-19 from that perspective. And one of the things that maybe people don't realize about Maine is it's not a New York City. It's not a very highly populated area. And plus, it's very tourist. People from Massachusetts and, everywhere else, Rhode Island, go up there for summertime. And, that's obviously cutting into a lot of their tourist revenue from that perspective. So it's a very serious thing from that side. And ultimately, I remember seeing your thread on Twitter about that. And it's great. If you haven't had a chance to check that out, definitely recommend it. There's a lot of great information about what brewers are doing out there in this space. Speaking of, breweries being creative. One of the things I want to put up on the screen right now is something that you made of how breweries should name their beer, and this is quite funny. We'll share links to this in the show notes, but walk us through how you created this particular kind of thing. It's hard to read. I know it's very small,
hard to read on the screen, but what it is essentially over the last, I want to say about 5 years, I've seen some really ill-advised beer names and beer labels. And I, in this world where I'm not attached to a brewery, I'm not really attached to a publication that cares about what I say on Twitter so much. I have been the one sitting there going like, really? Like, did you have to name it that, or did you not look that up ahead of time? And this is essentially a flowchart for, hey, I've got this funny beer name and I want to name it my beer. And it asks you questions like, did you look up the history of this person you named it after? Are you sure they're not a terrible person? Or, who's the punchline of the joke? Is it in a different language? And did you ask someone who really what it means? Like all these things that like are common pitfalls that people do. And Untapped is on here because it's like, did you at least check Untapped to see if anybody else in your neighborhood didn't name that beer the same? Because every time, a brewery sues each other over a name, I always just go on Untapped and I'm like, look, it's the first two. How do you not know? Okay. I mean, is obviously you should be officially checking these things, but generally speaking, this has been all these little parts were ruminating around in my brain for years. And this is a website called Lucid Chart, and it does that type of, chart making software. And it just in one day, I was just so annoyed that I just did it took 2 hours and I just went through the whole chart. And it was, I did it kind of as a facetious, like, please don't make me tell you this again chart. And then people were like, well, I want a copy of that. I'm like, okay. And then like, I want to like buy a copy of that. And I was like, all right. So I have had people at breweries tell me it's on the wall. Like,
wow,
so
that's like, awesome.
Okay, that's cool. But I did it really because you need other people to check the ideas that you have, because there's so many cultures, there's so many different people, there's so many different potential audiences for your beer, that what you find funny among like the 3 people that work at your brewery isn't necessarily going to land and might even be harmful or hurtful to a group that you don't know about. Right. So it's kind of just a real double checking prompt for you. But I tried to make it funny because I didn't want it to be, like waggy the finger pedantic at people. Just kind of like hey, just try not to be a jerk. And then
yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. We see a lot of people that come through and Untapped and use it the right way to kind of look to see if a beer has been made. But there are just sometimes we're just head scratchers. That's why I pulled this up and put it on the screen again. We'll put some notes in the show notes post show where you can find that if you'd like to purchase it. But it's very, very funny if you want to take a look at it. I've always kind of had a good chuckle when looking at these things because, we've seen a lot of breweries that have named things, kind of weirdly over the years. And it's definitely a flowchart.
Every box is inspired by something, just like every warning label was inspired by somebody.
Exactly. Well, we got some more questions for you, Carla. It's on the screen. Sure. I'm going to throw up one from Craft Beer Brewers Finish the Glass. Says, haven't had much Maine beer, especially down here in Texas. Do you know of any we have spread across the nation and getting a hold of?
I know that Allagash does more than, more national probably than any of our other brands do.
Right.
So if you can get Allagash, you might be able to get White or a couple of their kind of like flagship beers. I think, I'm trying to think of the other brewers that have, Sebago does some regional distro, but I don't know if they get all the way to Texas. Ditto with Baxter Brewing Company might be farther. The problem is that even our biggest breweries are not that big.
Right.
So the other national brand that we have had, and they've pulled back their production quite a bit, is Shipyard, because they've kind of been refocusing, what they're doing, and they're doing a brew pub, and they're kind of just pumping out some kind of their ancillary brands now. So it's probably unlikely that you'll have Shipyard as well. Texas is a hard one because it's farther away. Like a lot of the stuff you can get in Mass, Vermont, New Hampshire, New York, Connecticut, because that's not too far of a distro arrangement. Like we don't go. It takes a lot more energy and funds to get across the Mississippi, basically.
Right.
And these breweries, like I said, they're big, but they're not that big. Our top 3 are not huge.
Yeah. I think Allagash is probably the most more national one for Maine. But if you want to get some Maine beer, you gotta have to travel. Obviously not right now, but when you can, moving your way close to the East Coast, we're gonna get some of your stuff, especially the New England area is very well populated with some Maine beer across the board. Speaking of popular things across the board here, obviously in your experience working as a journalist in this area, you've got to see some trends in terms of styles and things that you've seen over the years. obviously there's a huge trend right now in hard seltzer and things of that nature going on there. What other trends do you see happening in the beer world today that are kind of very innovative and something you think will stick along longer than just the average trend, for lack of
I
a better
think
word?
some people might disagree with me with this, but I have seen, as we've seen a trend in session beers happening, the lower ABVs, we've
Right.
also seen the technology develop to get alcohol-free beer that doesn't taste
Yes.
like crap. And I think that there is more of a market for that than people realize, because
Mhm.
not only is that good for people who don't drink at all, but people of my generation, they do things like they'll take a week off, they'll take a month off, or
Right.
they'll, be kind of like what they call sober curious or whatever, or they want it just to, hang out all day, but they don't want to get drunk at the end of it, or they want it to space out what beers they're having at a bar, for example, like
Right.
one alcoholic, one not alcoholic, one without having to switch to like a glass of water with a lemon in it or something.
Right.
I think there's a market for that there, and there are a couple that are really quite tasty. And they don't remind you of anything else but beer. Athletic Brewing Company is probably the most well-known one out of North Carolina. But I do think that as that technology, just kind of like the gluten removing thing, is getting better as well,
Right.
as that technology kind of becomes a little bit more widespread, I think there's a definite market out there for that. And I'm hoping that that becomes more of a thing. Because personally, especially for me, if I'm at a bar, I would love to do that to space out my drinks. Just because, half the time, I'm there for a longer time, I'm talking all night long, and I don't necessarily want to have, 9% after 9% after 9%, just because I'm having a conversation. So that was a big one for me. Other than that, I think we're seeing a little bit of a pushback on the hazy, and we're getting back to like maybe West Coasty flavors, which would not make me sad. I love West Coast IPAs. Those sea hops are like my jam. So if those kind of come back, I wouldn't be sad. So those are the two that I'm kind of keeping my eye on for now, other than the whole seltzer thing happening.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, it's interesting talking about that. There's a question here from Mike Collins Photography, asks if are New England IPAs as a big a trend in New England as they are in the rest of the country. And I almost would say it's been starting to die down a little bit. Like you mentioned, it's been more on the West Coast IPAs, like you mentioned, is coming in. I think that obviously they're called New England IPAs because they kind of originated in Vermont and the New England area. But, the hazies are a thing that everyone, including myself, don't get me wrong, I love hazy IPAs, but there's nothing. I mean, yet we had our virtual festival last week or 2 weeks ago, and literally the first beer we had was pilsners and lager. It's like, wow, like getting back to basics. What do you think about this question here in terms of these trends?
So, I mean, just to make a long story short here, I think what I saw happen is that everybody went nuts about them when they first came out, and then everybody thought they had to make one, which meant that not all of them were good. Right. And I'm sorry to say that not all of them were good. Yep. So then it became, when you ordered one, you really weren't sure if you were going to get a good one or not. So there was a little hesitation from the market again, like, But what's happened in Maine, at least, is it's settled out to like, okay, like the guys I was talking about before, these guys are the haze guys, these guys are the not haze guys. And those haze people do it well. So like, you know what you're getting. So it's still there. It's definitely on tap everywhere. It's definitely, an option almost anywhere you go. But I feel like we've calmed down from the like extreme hype where everyone has to make one to it's a style, it's sticking around. We're going to have that forever, if that makes sense.
No, it does. I think this is the crazy part about New England IPAs is that everyone is all for them, but I always urge people watching to try some other styles as well and diversify your palate from that perspective, because sometimes it will definitely open your eyes to some of the things going on. Let's do a shout out here from Lizanne. She said, "This is an awesome convo. Thanks so much. Love Maine Beer. Did a beer occasion there in September.
Yeah.
Vermont, New England Beer, Maine rocks." Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. I think one of the things about Maine beer is that, like we were just talking about, it's not just the hazies. There's a lot more to offer here. And I think that when you kind of explore some of the opportunities here in the breweries here, you're going to have your eyes open some of the great things here. Speaking about Maine, though, another question from Earl Parker, shifting over a little bit to the food area. He asked, what's your go-to beer to pair with a good Maine lobster dinner? The other part of Maine people are excited about.
So I like to do not an IPA, but a pale ale with lobster, because it has enough hops, but not too much to like mess with that. Other people disagree with me and say like an Oxbow Farmhouse Pale Ale is like the way to go. For me, like, a typical Sebago Fries Leap or something that's like the low end of intensity for an IPA works really well. But frankly, if you're having beer and lobster at the same time, you can't really do it wrong. I mean, like, I mean, there's nothing that's going to make you go, oh God, no, because even a Goza has the saltiness to it. Even the
Right.
stout has that kind of brininess to it. Like you can play however you want there. And there's been several breweries, Oxbow included, that have brewed beer with lobster or lobster shells in them. Which also contributes a very interesting and unique flavor. But I think you can't go super wrong. I mean, like, I think the only thing you can do that would be bad would be like to overwhelm the flavor of the lobster, because you want to be able to taste the lobster.
That's the best part. I mean, you have your lobster roll, you have your butter, you want to dip that in. You don't want to ruin that kind of flavor there. I think that, those are probably the two things that from a Maine and food perspective, or beer and Maine and food perspective, you got the hazies and you got the lobster. So I'm glad we can stereotype Maine in two questions here when it comes
That's all
to
right. The lobster industry needs your money too. So come have a
exactly. If you have a question for Carla out there, make sure you use the chat on your platform. We'd love to hear from you. I think one of the cool things, about trends with New England IPAs, what are the kind of trends that you've seen over the years that have quickly died out? And we've talked a little bit about this in the past about, the hard root beer. That used to be kind of a thing that we would see. What are some other ones you've seen in your kind of line of work that kind of everyone thought they were everything, but then they died out pretty quickly?
Two come to mind immediately. One is the Brute IPA, and I know some people still want that to be a thing. I just don't think it was defined enough to be different enough to be its own trend. Like, people were saying this is a Brute IPA, and people weren't like understanding or kind of internalizing it once they had it. That's my perspective on that anyway. And then the other was, for whatever reason, like 2 summers ago, mango was in everything. And I don't know if like some like juice distributor got to all these breweries, but everybody had a mango something, which I did not mind. I love mango, but it was like just mango juice put in their beer. And I was like, okay, this is fine, but then it died. So I don't know what happened there, if there was a supply chain issue or if people were just like, I don't know if that's a long-term sticking point, but there was like the summer of mango beer, and I was like, all right, cool, I'm down. But it's gone now. So
I definitely remember that. And I feel like every brewery kind of added mango to a flavor or variant that they had. It was quite interesting from that perspective here on that front. But
Maine, we have no mangoes. We're not tropical. Like, none of that fits. Like, it's not something like blueberry beer. Sure, that's a thing. It comes and goes, and it's cute and it's sweet and it's whatever. But it's our thing. Like, mango doesn't. Like, who has mangoes in Maine? It's
crazy.
Yeah.
One of the interesting parts about, obviously, while we're doing these shows virtually is because of COVID. But I want to curious about your perception of how these events that are happening are transitioning over to virtual and how that impacts local events. Obviously, in Maine, we heard from the Brewers Association and GABF this year is going to be only virtual and not in person in Denver, Colorado. What are you seeing in Maine about how some of the other events are they going virtual, or is it a slow process? What's your kind of take on that?
I think it's been a little bit of a slow process because I think it is difficult to imagine a beer-centric event that does not involve people drinking beer somehow. So if there's a way that we can all provide or have access to the same beer while we're having a virtual event in some kind of a package, might make sense. There's been a little bit of slowness there because we're just trying to figure it out. And I'm not sure, I mean, GABF might be a good model for it when we, kind of see what that content looks like. But it's been a little, again, usually the summer is this gangbuster. We have a huge Maine Brewers Guild festival. Everybody shows up. That's basically every brewer in Maine basically shows up. And everybody who's a, Maine beer enthusiast, they come and they drink for hours. And it's wonderful because it's like you can get the stuff that's 5 hours away from you up in Maine, but it's right here now. So there's a challenge there in kind of what is your goal in doing that? Like, what do you want people to get out of the virtual event that they were getting out of that? Like, and for me, it's a lot of social stuff. Like, I love saying hi and, checking what the brewers are doing and everything. It's less about the, physical getting drunk, but if we're not all in the same room interacting with each other, it's a little bit hard to imagine. So I don't know. I don't know what the future of that's going to be. I'm willing to try any of it because anything that we can do to kind of get people together and to celebrate Maine beer is good in my books. I'm just kind of waiting to see kind of what the Brewers Association comes up with and kind of what innovation and innovative ideas they might use to accomplish that.
Speaking of your love for Maine beer, we got a great question from Alicia here. Is that
Yep.
other than places in Maine, where's your go-to city for the best beer scene? Putting you
Ooh.
on the spot of picking every city in the United States and putting
I've
you on
been
the hot
to a
seat.
lot. Okay, so I'm gonna cheat on this question a little bit. I'm gonna modify your question slightly. So there are a lot of great beer cities in this wonderful country of ours. There's, Chicago's fantastic, Asheville's fantastic, San Diego, blah, 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 blah. But there are a couple of unexpectedly good beer cities. And one of them is Salt Lake City, Utah. And I have gone there for work several times. They've got multiple amazing craft beer bars. They've got great breweries there. The whole Mormon beer ABV limit thing is not a thing there anymore in the way that, your parents talked about it. It's awesome. I had an awesome time. I got sent there for something completely not beer related, and I was like, "Are you kidding me? This is great." And then the other one is Buffalo, New York. I went out there for a trip to kind of check out their beer scene, and they are really being pioneers in what they call brewery first development. Like they're encouraging breweries to come in and be the first tenants of these redeveloped areas to kind of generate the jobs that then generate the restaurant, that generate the shopping center, and they're basically doing everything they can to remove all the barriers for breweries to come in. And they've done a fantastic job. When I visited a couple of years ago, it was just coming up, and it's only exploded since then. So again, not on everybody's top list. It's not in Austin. It's not at Asheville, North Carolina, but it's awesome, and it's doing really, really well, and it surprised me a lot. So I talked about a lot of the good ones. There's some really great beer cities out there, but I think those two are really neat, in their uniqueness and unexpected on that list.
Yeah, definitely looking in the comments here. People definitely agree with you. Salt Lake City, from Earl and Kelly and Alan said Buffalo is a great for small breweries there.
Yeah.
So definitely agree. Another great question here from Scar Rodriguez. I'm heading to Arcadia National Park late August. Any recommendations for beers to try?
Atlantic Brewing Company is right in Bar Harbor, and they're awesome. They have multiple locations now. One's the brewery itself, and one is like a brewery restaurant, but they have great burgers and an awesome place to eat. Fantastic. Now, if you're driving up there, that means that you're literally going to pass every good brewery that's in Maine on your way there, because it's a coastal route that goes all the way up diagonal in Maine. If you have time to stop, worth going to Oxbow, that's on your way. Worth going to Maine Beer Company, that's in Freeport, that's going to be on your way. And just in that area in general, there aren't a ton of breweries, but Atlantic is fantastic, and I think you should go there. They're also another one like Sebago. They've been around a while, but they've reinvented themselves in a way that makes sense. It works. It's great. They've got a porter that's fantastic called Coal Porter, like lumps of coal, and I definitely recommend it. Yeah.
There you go, Scar. You have your recommendations. Hope you're writing those down, because that's an important part right there.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of the stuff that we see in the beer world because of COVID is so different, and I'm so excited to have someone like yourself, Carla, who's literally, you should be a tour guide for beer in Maine. Maybe you should just start up your new business from that perspective and do there. But I wanted to thank you so much, Carla, for being on the show, and thank our audience for listening. Any last shout outs you want to give, Carla, on where people can find you and a little bit more about what you do?
Sure. I'm most active these days on Twitter. My handle there is @BeerBabe. I'm tweeting about beer and social stuff, so just be forewarned there. But if you are planning a trip to Maine and you want recommendations, hit me up there, and I'd be happy to help you out and point you in the right direction, because there's a lot going on, and it's also really difficult to search for what you're doing. Then I'd be happy to kind of point you in a great direction. So I just saw somebody in the comments mention Barreled Souls, also in Saco. Yes, they are amazing brewery, tiny, using a Burton on Union system like crazy, but awesome, good beer. They have one called Stay Puffed, which tastes like a s'more, and it's 12%. It's so good.
That's awesome.
But generally speaking, just hit me up on Twitter. My beer website domain has been hacked right now, so I'd say that, but at the same time, I'm kind of working to fix that behind the scenes. So I'll make sure to let y'all know when that's up. But just generally speaking, if you can get yourself up here at some point, there's a lot to be had up in this area.
Awesome. Carla, thank you so much for being part of the show. We really appreciate it, and we'll talk to you soon.
Sounds good. Thanks a lot. Cheers.
Cheers. Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening in to our show this afternoon or evening, What time is it? I'm not even sure. Want a couple of upcoming notes about our programming. This Thursday, we're going to have another special virtual happy hour. That's with Threes Brewing Company. That's going to be at 7 p.m. Eastern. And this Saturday, going to talk to my good old friend Bob Olson, who is the owner of Bolero Snort. You may have seen a lot of the crazy brews that they're brewing out there in New Jersey with Fruity Pebbles and a lot of crazy stuff. But don't miss that on this Saturday at 2:30 p.m. Really appreciate it. Also wanted to talk a little bit about if you don't have time to watch our videos, we have all of our videos on audio only mode and on anywhere you listen to podcasts, anywhere you listen to Apple, Google, wherever we're there. So you can dedicate and watch some of the time here. So we really appreciate all you tuning in this afternoon and this evening for our first ever Tuesday virtual happy hour. Hope to see you on Thursday for our conversation with Threes Brewing Company out of Brooklyn, New York. And stay safe out there. And cheers, everybody. Thanks for watching.